Welcome to this next video in strategic scenarios. In this video, I'll actually be talking about the strategic scenarios. How do we make them? How do we build them? This is, by the way, inspired by the book Strategic Based Scenarios by Paul de Ruijters that I have over here on the side. And I can strongly recommend that you jump into that book and read the chapters as well. It's really easy to read and have really good explanations of things. And that's also where I've stolen the copy inspired by the small figure above us. The strategic scenarios is in the other end of what I've talked about in my previous videos. This is where we're looking into the future. And if we start with the basic definition, because the basic definition is what we need here in order to move forward. Scenarios are images of the future constructed by combining possible developments in different ways. I've put in some few images here to kind of get things going. It's not necessarily that a large number of future scenarios is the best for you. It's actually not a goal in itself. I'll get back to why that is. But we all have perceptions, ideas about the way that the world is moving. And in our strategic scenarios, we need to capture some of these things in order to move it forward so that we can operate in a sensible way moving forward. There are a ton of good company examples of this. These examples show companies actually being able to predict the future to the level where they can actually operate, even with uncertainties, even when things change. The first thing we'll talk about is our scenario horizon, and it might sound a little bit wishy-washy, but let me try to take these three elements out: the space, the time, and the issues. Space is who these scenarios affect. So we need to define who are we interested, willing to include into this scenario. Often we do that as a stakeholder mapping, the company itself and the people involved within it. How broad we make that circle, well, that's a big part of our strategic scenario horizon. Then we need to have a time issue. For how long? What's the time span that we will build our scenarios for? Usually, a good rule of thumb is that we say the return on the investments that we are making plus a payback or profitability after that. So if we're making initiatives, ideas, plans, which will last, say, 5 years into the future, and we invest in that, well, we need to see the investments that we make now, will they be captured within that time frame? And will we be able to have a reasonable profit afterwards to cover that break even? Industries are very, very different from each other. IT would have a shorter, mining would have a very long. The last topic is the issues. What are the topics that we will be addressing in these scenarios? Somehow we need to limit ourselves a bit. We cannot do everything. We cannot predict everything. Well, as one of the Danish philosophers said, it is really difficult to predict, especially about the future. When we have settled these things here, write them down. Make sure you agree on them. We can move into what's called the key uncertainties. These key uncertainties will help us focus our mind, focus our research, focus our strategic scenarios. We will come up with a number of scenarios. We plot them on the importance scale and the uncertainty scale. Why do we do this? Well, primarily because we want to work with things which has important or impact on our organization, but we also want to work with the things which can go either really well or really bad, which means that there is a high uncertainty. We actually don't know what is going to happen, and therefore we need to take it into consideration. So, scenarios, key uncertainties, things that are both important and uncertain, those are the ones that we will put in and focus on in creating our strategic scenario framework. In our strategic scenario framework, we take our uncertainties and place them in each dimension. Uncertainty 1 and uncertainty 2 in the small figure next to me. You can see this set up. We have two uncertainties. Either it happens or it doesn't happen, which gives us a 2 by 2 matrix. Remember, if we then had three key uncertainties, we had to build another dimension. So that would be 2 times 2 times 2. So 8 scenarios we suddenly need to build. If you remember back to when I started this small video, I said the number of scenarios is not a purpose in itself. We don't want to have that many scenarios because it will make our planning and future work much more challenging. So we will try to limit us to 2, maybe 3 key uncertainties, things which you remember was important and high uncertainty. Those we combine, and based on that, we can move and describe our scenarios. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to do this. Sometimes we know that there is a direction. That's when we move into the MONT scenarios. This is, in essence, a decision tree. When I get into the options video on the strategic scenarios, I'll get more into options trees, but this is a scenario building variation. We have a starting point. We can have an outcome in either one or two directions. Then we reach what's called an inflection point, a place where things is up in the air again. At that point, we will be able to move in either or direction. And that happens over and over again. I've just made it in one direction here, but it will also be able to go in the other direction, which also means that it could quickly become very complicated. But the big difference is that we have a starting point and we have some key inflection points, some key moments in time where things are happening. Right? But what is a good scenario? A good scenario is a trilemma, or not a dilemma where there's 2 dimensions, but a trilemma where there's 3 dimensions. It needs to be relevant, it needs to be plausible, it needs to bring new insights. These insights, along with the relevance and plausibility, will give us the scenarios. In our description of the scenarios, it might sound a little bit funny that I say, hey, we need a catchy title, but we want to be able to communicate these scenarios. So therefore, we build scenarios. So this is with a catchy title, the jungle scenario, the World Trade Center scenario, and so forth. We built some title around it, which will create images within the heads of the people, because that's much, much, much easier to remember when we move forward and work on them. They will build details on it, we build descriptions. We take what we've learned, what we've described, what we have gathered before, put it in here so we get a comprehensive story. If possible, we put numbers on it. We quantify these scenarios, because if we quantify the scenarios, it'll be easier to measure up against it and see that we are moving towards this or towards that scenario. Lastly, put images on it. Google some images. There are a ton of them out there. Even if you're not good at drawing yourself, it is something which will help you in simplifying it. It can also just be what's called a rich picture, where you show diagrams, people walking, and well, just the stick person is good enough, handing over payment in some sort of way for some product which they have that uses in a certain kind of way. This means that we get both the visual people, we get the word people, and we get the number people on board in our strategic scenarios. That was it for this small video here. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.